Hey everyone, it's been a little while, but I've had some other stuff going on, so I haven't really had time to tinker with the vehicles lately. But I do have a project on the old UAZ because I parked this here about a month ago, maybe a little more, because I realized it didn't have brakes anymore. And back then I took a quick look underneath, and it seemed like the master cylinder was leaking pretty badly. And I think it's time I do something about that, so let's get this inside and take a look at it. So it has been a while since this was fired up the last time, so it's going to want a little bit of priming. Yeah, there we go. And I can hear it's getting into the carb as well. Alright, let's try it out. Okay, so it does fire up, but it doesn't sound like we're running on all four. That one works. That works. That one is not doing anything. Nope. And that one's not doing anything. Okay, so we're only running on 2 right now. Okay, well it should be enough to get us inside, so let's start with that. Well, I can already tell that it's getting plenty of fuel. I can almost taste it in the air. I couldn't really take the choke off because it had so little power that it was just gonna die out. So I'm pretty sure we are having an ignition issue as well as the brake issue. So yeah, anyway, we are gonna be in the little room here today because I still have a little Unimog that's taking up all my other space. Remind me to get that done. Anyway, let's start by checking out what's going on with that ignition. Okay, so I just had a quick look in here to go over the ignition, and there's already a lot of things that I can tell is wrong with this. But I would just like to say that I have actually not been doing a whole lot of work to this at all. I did do some modifications on the inside when I got it, just to make it street legal here. I had to remove the back seats and a few things to make it legal as a van, and also it had an LPG fuel system so it could run on liquid gas, and I removed that as well because there's just no use for it here. But because it had that, it actually had the original fuel filter right on that pin right there, but this was a little aluminium housing, and because it had been running gas, that hadn't been used for a really long time, so it was just completely corroded, so I just put a little inline filter on it instead. But otherwise, I really haven't done much. I think I gave it new brake shoes all the way around. Yeah, I did, because they were worn out, and I fixed some light and stuff, but Other than that, I've really just been driving this and off-roading this just as it came to me from Latvia, so it's actually been doing really well until now. Alright, so the first thing I noticed down here is that everything is looking very old. Like the coil has actually started to rust. And also the distributor cap looks like it's an old Bakelite cap. They've been plastic for many years, so this is really old. And also I saw that the wire back here on the, what do you call that? The condensator, that's actually no longer attached. It's just kind of dangling down there. And it's also just about to fall off up here. It should have been hooked onto this connection right here. And there's also just a lot of things that have been taped together, like the main lead from the coil, that's just been taped on there. And there's a lot of these tape connections where they've just twisted the wires and just taped them over. This is something you do in an emergency, but this is not a fix. Really, you want to make a good solid connection that is also watertight, and this tape is not watertight. In fact, this tape is just going to hold moisture on that connection, and it's just going to corrode and give you a bad connection over time. So yeah, seems like there's several things that need a little bit of help down here. But instead of trying to mess with all this old stuff, I actually think I have most of these components. Some of them are a little bit used, but it's still going to be much better than this really old worn out stuff. So let's get this in here, get it just roughly dialed in, and also fix some of all these wires, and then see if that doesn't help it a little bit. I don't know why the positive cable is so long on this. There's really no need for that. Let's see why this is taped on here. Okay, so probably just because it's really easy to get it out. So I'm guessing it's just been falling off. Okay. Get this coil off. It's kind of a sketchy mounting. Yeah, that was pretty sketch. Okay, what do we have here? Still says made in the USSR, so this is some pretty old stuff. Okay, so I have cylinder 1 over here. And just to make things easier for myself, I'm just going to mark that out. Come on. What? Okay, that hasn't been off in a while. Anyway, I'm just gonna turn it so that this is pointing at... Wow, this is really worn. I'm gonna turn the engine so this is pointing at that mark I just made. That way I know that when I drop the new one in here, or the newer one, I just have to line that up as well, and I should be in the ballpark in terms of timing. It's actually really handy that this has a hand crank. Handy hand crank, okay. If I can hit it, that is. Right around there. Nice. Nice. So the spark plugs are actually not looking very old, but I don't think I've ever had them out of there, so I'm just gonna pull those out, just make sure they look all right and check the gap, just to make sure they are not the problem, but I don't think they are. Just gonna start back here, because this is one of those that didn't fire. Yeah, they look pretty new. They're not burned or anything. It should be alright. Yeah, they're all looking really good. They're not burned or anything. The gap is supposed to be 0.8 millimeters. And that is pretty much spot on right there. And that's the same on all of them. Also, the electrodes are looking really good. I don't think these have many hours on them, so I'm just gonna give them a quick cleanup and they'll go right back in. Alright, so we didn't really have any problems with the plugs. I didn't really expect as much. I'm pretty sure it's all related to this old distributor. So I already showed you that the wire on the condenser was coming off, and it actually fell off completely as I was taking this off. But also the drive down here, it's just about to fall off. And really there's just a lot of play in the shaft in here. Also the contact points down here, they are really worn out and they're just about to touch the metal instead. And the rotor itself, that's also an old Bakelite type, and it's pretty burned in the middle and also out here on the tip. And the same goes for the cap. The contact points in here, they're also really burned and weathered. So clearly there's a lot of problems with this entire unit. Now, some of it could probably be salvaged, but actually this is not even my main concern right now, because this is really the first time I've even had the cap off this, and honestly, I wasn't expecting this switch in here. Turns out there's something wrong with this entire setup. This is actually several things merged together, so it might be a little confusing, but I'll try to explain. Just gonna put some of this stuff loosely back here to help explain this. Right, so first of all, it's important to mention that that is not the original engine for this car. This was swapped at some point. That is the engine out of a Gas 24 or Volga 24, same difference. But there's a lot of similarities between this engine and the one that was supposed to be in this. But I'm told this is a very common swap because this is almost a drop-in replacement and it has a few more horsepower. But it also has the same ignition systems that you would otherwise find in an UAZ. So what we have going on this is we have the old type of ignition. That means that you have a little switch in here that is opening and closing as this is rotating, because it's riding on a little cam in here. And that sends some ground connection through this wire, out this terminal, and up to the coil. So that little contact is essentially just turning the coil on and off. And that's what has the coil pulsating that high voltage that we want, that we then redistribute down here and out to the spark plugs. And because it has that little mechanical switch, we call this mechanical ignition. Now, the problem with mechanical ignition is that that little switch is very sensitive. It needs to be adjusted very precisely, and it also gets burned out over time because it's also sparking in between those contacts. So they get burned, you have to clean them off, you have to adjust the switch, and it's really quite a hassle. So later on they moved on to what is called electronic ignition. So let me just get a distributor with that. Just get rid of this thing and get this nice and shiny one in here. And just like that, now we have electronic ignition in this. So what this means is that we no longer have a contact in here. Instead, we just have this little magnetic pickup that just reacts with these little fins on the wheel in here instead. So now we no longer have any of those moving parts, and we don't have anything sparking in here. So there's a lot less maintenance to this. But because this is just a magnetic pickup, it's now sending out a little signal instead of an actual ground. So we can't use that to turn the coil on and off, so instead it runs to a box like this. And this does the actual switching on and off of the coil based on the signal from that little magnetic pickup. So that's why this caught me off guard a little bit, because I had just seen this and figured, well, this had the electronic ignition. That would make sense. They've swapped out the engine, so why not swap to the newer type of ignition as well? But actually, I'm thinking what's happened is, because this is too old to have ever had electronic ignition, I'm guessing that someone swapped it on the original engine, they upgraded and gave it electronic ignition, and that's why this box is here, and it's also mounted in a weird place because it's not supposed to be there. And then later on in life, something probably happened to that engine, someone threw in this one, and they may not even have known, but this engine just still had the old mechanical type of ignition, and they've just wired that up the same way that the electronic ignition already was, and somehow that's been working until now, even though it's not supposed to run through this box. So what I'm thinking right now is yet another change of plans, because I actually have a complete set of this with the electronic distributor and a new control box and also the new type of coil, because there's a difference in those as well. You're not really supposed to use the old coils with the new ignition, but you can use the new coils with the old ignition. Anyway, this was really meant to go in my other 469, but I'm thinking right now it'll be better off in this one, so we can get a complete or matching set into this instead. So let's get the rest of that old stuff off and get this in here instead. Get this stuff out of the way. Okay. Alright, so that was just hanging on by one bolt. Nice. So I'm just gonna start getting things mounted in a way that looks nice, and then we can worry about getting everything wired up later. Why is this so thick? Hold on. So most coils I have seen are kind of the same size, like this. But the one I just got is just really thick and short. No further comment. Let's just get it in there. Oh, and by the way, I should probably just mention that I also have this thing. This is a little double resistor, and it goes in between your power supply, or your ignition power, for the coil. Now, the thing is, I can read Cyrillic and I know a few words, but I don't actually speak Russian, so it's been a little difficult for me to try and figure out exactly what the point of this is. But from what I can gather is this just limits the amount of voltage you're putting into your coil and thereby into everything else. So I suspect it's really just a way to ease the load on things and try and make it last a little bit longer. But I've also seen several diagrams where this thing is just left out entirely, so clearly it's not even necessary. I'm thinking this is an old military thing. Well, I know it's old because even though I bought this unit new, it's still marked USSR, where everything else is marked Russia and Bulgaria. So this is back from Soviet times, also has that good old Bakelite stuff instead of plastic. Anyway, I think I'm just going to leave this out for now, because this didn't have one in the first place, and apparently it's just not necessary. So there's no reason to go and overcomplicate things now, and I'd rather just run full voltage to my coil. Right, let's get this in here for a start. Now I already know where the engine is, so this just has to be pointing roughly at number 1. And we should be in the ballpark with that already. Right. Get this thick boy in here. Think that'll work? Let's just try it. So this controller is a little bit smaller, so let's see if we can mount it a little nicer than it was before. See if there's room for it right here. Still at a bit of a weird angle. So what about this? No, it's not really gonna work either. Alright, I've just decided it doesn't really matter given the condition of the rest of the car. It can sit at a bit of an angle here, it doesn't really matter. Oh, and by the way, actually, for those wondering, this relay, that's just a very hastily mounted backup relay for the starter relay over there. And actually, now that I think of it, this doesn't really serve any purpose. The way I remember it, it just failed the starter, but it turned out it actually wasn't that. But I'd already made this and I've just never taken it off, so let's just get rid of this thing. Okay, I've been looking at this for a little while now, and it's already annoying me that that is at such an angle. This is not going to work. That's going to annoy me every time I look into the engine bay. So I can't really straighten it up if I want to use the original bolts, but you know what? This thing is not original to the car anyway, so I'm going to get rid of the bolts and straighten it up and just give it a little screw in the top instead. Do it like that instead. Nice. Look at that. That is so much more pleasant to look at. Nicely lined up with the coil over there, and it's going to be with the battery as well once that gets in here. Alright, anyway, let's get this stuff wired up. So first off, I'm not gonna worry too much about making these wires pretty. I'm just gonna get everything connected just to make sure this even works. So this here is our ignition wire coming from the car to the coil. That was actually supposed to be red, but this is a gray one. I'm not gonna change that. But we'll make this one red because it's gonna need another one to carry on down here to power our control box. And we're just gonna route that up over here for now. So that's power taken care of. And we're gonna have a yellow one running from D for distributor, I guess. And we're gonna run that down to the terminal on the distributor down here. And get that on here as well. Okay. Okay, so the last wire is going to run from K3 down here to the negative terminal on the coil. And that was actually supposed to be a green wire, but I've just checked and the only green stuff I have is some really thin gauge, so I'm not going to use that. I'm just going to run a black wire for now. This one is going to be easy enough to replace later on once I get some proper green wire. And that's just going to go up here. Alright, so yeah, I know it's not pretty, but like I said, I'll handle that later once I know if it actually works. So let's get some spark plug leads back on here and put in a battery so we can test this stuff out. So the firing order is going to be 1, 2, 4, 3. So we'll do 1 and 2 and 4 and 3. And of course the lead for the coil as well. Let's get some power in here, see what happens. It may just catch on fire, who knows? Just open up the windows and the door behind the camera just to get some air through here in case it actually starts. It's not exactly going to be spitting out vitamins. So yeah, let's give it a go and see what happens if this stuff actually works. Still sounds a little weird, but that's because it's really cold out here, so I'm still running the choke, and also I don't really know where the timing is, so we're gonna have to figure that out. But I just want to run it for long enough that I can take the choke off and we can set that timing. It's getting much too dark to film this stuff. Alright, that's the choke off. It didn't die. Sounds like we're still running on all 4. Nice. Right, so I'm gonna shut this off again, and then I'm gonna take the hose off the vacuum advancement, because I don't want to run that when I'm setting the timing. I'm gonna put a bolt in that just to block it off so we don't have a vacuum leak instead. Just gonna get this off and just shove a bolt in here to close it off. That should do the trick. Alright. Okay. We'll get this on number 1 and get some power to it. There we go. Let's try this. I don't know how well is it going to show on camera because I can barely see it myself. It looks like we are right on the mark. The other one, the one a little closer to me, that was one I drew by mistake, so ignore that. We want the one with a hole in it, so that's the one furthest away from me. So I'm going to want to advance this just a little bit. Let's try that. See if I can at least somewhat film this again. Focusing on all the wrong things here. There we go. Yeah, that's a little better. That's roughly 5 to 10 degrees before. Alright. Just gonna get it back inside because it's very cold and dark out here, and then we can talk a little bit more about that. this thing back on here. All right, so that stuff all seems to be working really well, so that's nice. Now, as for the timing, I can't really set it super precise for several reasons. First of all, there's no degree markings on this, and I have a really simple timing gun, so I can't preset it on that. So I'm just gonna have to roughly set it. I think I have it at about 8 to 10 degrees before, and that's gonna be pretty close. But the thing is, this is also made to run on really low octane fuel, so I can't even go off the standard specs. They're made for something like octane 76 or so, but the fuel we have around here is pretty spicy. Typically the lowest octane we can get is 95, so I'm probably gonna want that ignition timing to be a bit off anyway, but I can't really tell. I'm just gonna have to do it by sound and by feel once I actually go out and drive this a bit. But I'm really liking the look I ended up with here. This is much more nice and clean than what it was before. I am gonna go in and clean up this wiring, get it all shorted down and tied up to make it look nice. But I would just really like to get a green wire instead of that black one before I do that. Not that it has anything to do with the functionality, but it's just much nicer to work on later on if the colors actually match the diagrams. And I may also want to go and get some slightly shorter plug leads because this is a little unnecessary. Right, so this was a bit of a debacle and not at all what I had in mind for this video. I don't know if I've ever mentioned, but I'm not the biggest fan of these old gassers. I much prefer the old diesels. This stuff is just way too finicky and delicate for my taste. But anyway, we got this going again, really happy with that. Even looks a little better in the engine room, so that's all good. But I'm thinking I'm gonna split this into 2 videos because, well, first of all, this one is getting too long, and also all this ignition stuff has absolutely nothing to do with the brakes that I was actually gonna fix. So I'm thinking next time we're gonna tackle those brakes, and also I'm gonna clean up my wiring down here, and hopefully we can take this thing for a drive. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.